Paul McCartney's voice is famous all over the world. It is sweet, strong, and hard to forget. But behind his guitar, the big concerts, and being a Beatle, there is a secret story. It's about his private love life, which he kept hidden for many, many years. Paul has written lots of love songs, but there are 7 women he never really talked about in public. Some were very important to him in private. Others shared secrets with him. These stories were kept behind the curtain of fame. He never said their names until now. At 83 years old, the music legend is finally ready to tell the truth. He is removing the privacy around his personal life to show the real person inside the famous star. And when you hear who was in his life during those private times, you will listen to his love songs differently. These are the 7 women who changed him the most, who made him who he is, who left a mark on his heart forever. Let's begin with the woman from his younger days. Jane Asher, the girlfriend who helped build his world. Jane Asher wasn't just Paul McCartney's girlfriend in the 1960s, she was his inspiration. She helped create some of his most famous songs. Paul met Jane in 1963. She was already a successful actress and TV star. She was very smart and classy, and she showed Paul the cool, artistic side of London. From the moment they met, Jane was a big part of Paul's life. She was there during the crazy time of Beatlemania. She was there when the Beatles made their amazing albums. She was there when the whole world watched him. They were together for almost 5 years. During that time, Paul changed from a pop star into a serious musician. Songs like The Night Before and We Can Work It Out and many other parts of albums were inspired by Jane. But what most people didn't know was how close they really were, not just in their hearts but in their private life together. People from that time say Paul was completely devoted to Jane. Their connection was much deeper than the pictures the public saw. They lived together at his house in London. They traveled together. They were a real couple, sharing real love and a real life together. Their relationship was special because Jane showed Paul a world outside of music, a world of theater, movies, and smart talking. Paul didn't just like having her around, she changed him. Other band members said Paul acted differently when Jane was there. He thought more deeply and wanted to put more feeling into his songs. She changed not just his love songs but his whole career during the Beatles' biggest years. When Jane ended their engagement in 1968 saying they wanted different things from life, Paul was heartbroken. He had already written Hey Jude, which people say is about her son, but the feelings in the song are definitely about Jane. She was his first true love, his first deep connection with a woman who saw him as Paul, not just as a Beatle. That kind of close, private connection never really left him. Years later, Paul said in a few interviews that Jane was the one he lost, the woman who taught him what it really means to love someone. Even though Jane married someone else and had her own happy life, Paul never forgot their time together. To him, Jane Asher will always be the woman who made him feel like a normal person. He felt sad about losing her through all his other relationships, always wondering if he should have stayed with her. Next came Linda McCartney, who became his safe place, the woman who calmed him down. After Jane, Paul had a few other girlfriends. He dated actress Pattie Boyd, who was also linked to other Beatles. He met people in London's music scene. But then Linda Eastman came into his life in 1967 and everything changed. Linda wasn't a singer or actress. She was a photographer and a businesswoman. Most importantly, she was exactly what Paul needed after his wild 20s. They married in 1969, and from then on, Linda was not just his wife but his best partner and friend. The world saw a team that made music and art together, but people close to them knew Paul and Linda shared a private life that was very, very close. They were together all the time, in every way, in their feelings, in their work, and in their personal life. They raised kids together and made music together at the same time. Linda was on his albums, toured with him, and was part of all his big career choices. Their marriage was an example for other rock stars. It showed 2 people building a life together but still being themselves. But the base of their partnership was definitely a strong personal attraction and a close private bond. Paul was completely devoted to Linda in a way he had never been before. He wrote love songs for her, traveled the world with her, and built his whole life around her. People from his band and crew said Paul and Linda were very loving in public. Their close personal relationship was obvious to everyone around them. They weren't afraid to show they loved each other. It was real, it lasted, and anyone could see it. Linda made Paul feel complete in a way that was more than just business or friendship. She made him feel like a regular person with a family, not just a member of the world's biggest band. When Linda died in 1998, Paul was destroyed. He didn't just lose a wife or a partner, he lost his closest companion. How deep their relationship was is something they never talked about publicly. Linda wasn't just Paul's second wife. She was the woman who gave him a calm, steady life after years of rock and roll craziness. Paul has said in interviews since her death that he still talks to her, still thinks about her all the time, and still feels her with him. That's not just being sweet. That shows a relationship that was deeply, truly close in every single way. Then came Heather Mills and everything got complicated. The marriage that everyone argued about. Paul met Heather Mills in 1999, a little over a year after Linda died. Heather was a model, a survivor of a landmine accident, an activist, and she was almost 30 years younger than Paul. To his friends, he was attracted to her right away and very strongly. Heather seemed young, full of energy, and she made Paul feel lively in his older age. They married in 2002, and by all reports, especially at the start, their personal relationship was very strong and all-consuming. People close to Paul then said he was almost obsessed with Heather. He was so in love it seemed risky for a man in his 60s. The age difference didn't matter to him, it might have even made him more attracted to her. He gave her lots of attention, traveled with her, and was very close with her. Friends were afraid Paul was moving too quickly after Linda's death and wasn't thinking clearly. But Paul was sure. He was driven by attraction and wanted to feel alive again. Their personal connection in those early years was very real and very intense. He bought her presents, introduced her to everyone, and wanted the world to see he was still full of life. But the marriage fell apart fast. In a few years, what was once passionate became full of fights. The close personal bond they had at the start turned into arguments and confusion. By the time they divorced in 2008, the world saw one of the messiest celebrity breakups ever. Heather did interviews, there were lawsuits, and people made public accusations. But what stayed mostly private was the story of their personal life during their marriage. Paul never talked publicly about the private details, staying quiet and respectful. Even when Heather went on TV and talked about their life, Paul's silence said a lot about him. He refused to fight in public about the private parts of his marriage, choosing to protect Heather's privacy even when she was being mean to him. What people know is that Paul was so physically attracted to Heather that he didn't listen to his better judgment. He married her, had a child with her, and built a life with her partly based on a strong personal connection that just couldn't hold the marriage together. When it ended, Paul was embarrassed not just because the marriage failed, but because the whole world saw something that started with so much passion break down. It was a sad lesson that personal attraction alone can't make a marriage last, no matter how strong it feels at the beginning. After that, Nancy Shevell became his safe place, the steady partner who made him believe in love again. After the mess with Heather Mills, Paul was careful. He'd been married 3 times, had lost Linda, and didn't want to repeat his mistakes. Then he met Nancy Shevell, a businesswoman who was married to someone else when they first became friends. What began as a friendship slowly became more. When Nancy's marriage ended and she was single, Paul didn't wait. They married in 2011, and by all reports, their relationship was a return to calm and grown-up partnership. But what people don't talk about much is the continued personal and private side of their relationship. Paul, now in his late 60s and 70s, was still in a loving, close partnership. Nancy was a different kind of attraction than Heather or even Linda. She was his equal, a woman around his own age who understood his world from inside the music business. Their relationship was built on being smart together and emotional maturity, but it was also built on real personal attraction and a private life together. Paul didn't marry Nancy just because she was available or he was lonely. He married her because they shared a real, lasting personal and emotional connection. People close to Paul when he first met Nancy said he was clearly happier, more settled, and more peaceful than he'd been since Linda died. Nancy calmed him in a way that felt easy and natural. They traveled together, worked on business together, and were truly close partners. Insiders say Paul has stayed devoted to Nancy in a way he wasn't with Heather, building a calm life that lets him keep making music without the chaos of his last marriage. They have mostly kept their private life to themselves, but people close to them can see that Paul has stayed personally active and involved in his marriage to Nancy even into his 80s. This is the relationship that shows Paul can have a real, lasting partnership. When it's built on mutual respect and real attraction, not just passion, it works. Nancy understood Paul in a way that was deeper than just surface level. She accepted his past, respected his history, and built a future with him based on real teamwork and shared beliefs. Stevie Nicks was something completely different, the musician who almost changed his path. Somewhere in music history, there's a story about Paul McCartney and Stevie Nicks that's never been fully told. Stevie, the famous singer from Fleetwood Mac, was playing at the same concerts as Paul in the 1970s and later. They respected each other a lot, liked each other's work, and kept meeting over the years. They understood each other's art in a special way. What no one has ever said for sure is that their connection was more private than just professional. Rumors have gone around for years among people in the music business. There were quiet talks at parties, hints in interviews that were later cut out. The story is that Paul and Stevie had a short romantic moment sometime in the late 1970s or early 1980s. Paul was married to Linda then, but he was sometimes tempted when he was touring and working with other artists. Whether this was a one-time thing, a short affair, or just a strong flirtation has never been confirmed by either of them. But people close to Paul have suggested that Stevie Nicks was someone he was privately close with, someone who represented a special artistic and personal connection that was different from his marriages. Stevie understood Paul's creative side in a way that Linda, even though she was supportive, didn't quite match. She was his equal, a famous artist, a woman who knew the pressures and temptations of rock and roll life. People who saw them noticed a special bond between them, but no one talked about it openly. Stevie, for her part, has never said she and Paul were more than friends and professional admirers. But the spark between them when they were together was obvious. Music writers have seen how they acted together, how their voices sounded on the rare times they sang together, and the clear respect and liking they had for each other. Whether their connection was just emotional or also physical is one of rock and roll's best-kept secrets. But insiders close to Paul say Stevie Nicks was someone he really cared about, someone who changed his life and work and should be acknowledged. She represented a different possibility, passion, and a special artistic link during a part of his life. Maureen Starkey brought temptation and a mistake. The ex-wife he shouldn't have been with. This is where Paul's story gets really uncomfortable. Maureen Starkey was Ringo Starr's first wife. She had been part of the Beatles' extended family since the early 1960s. She and Ringo had 3 kids before they divorced in 1975. By the late 1970s, Maureen was a single mom living her life after being married to a very famous man. She was still beautiful, still talented, and still in the rock and roll world. Paul and Maureen kept seeing each other at music events, at parties with mutual friends in the small world of rock stars. They shared a history through the Beatles and understood what it was like to be part of that famous story. According to stories that have come out recently, Paul and Maureen had a short, private connection during this time. It wasn't a full relationship, but it was definitely more than friendship. They were privately close at least once, and it happened when Paul was still married. This is not something either of them has ever said publicly, but people close to both Paul and Ringo knew about it. There were lots of rumors. The whispers wouldn't stop, and the truth was that Paul had hurt his bandmate in a way that really upset Ringo. Knowing Paul had been private with his ex-wife created a tension that hurt the two Beatles' friendship for years. Ringo never yelled at Paul about it, but their friendship got colder after that. Talking became awkward. They called each other less, worked together less, and weren't as warm with each other. Paul, for his part, seemed to feel guilty about what happened. It was a moment when he broke his marriage promises and his loyalty to his bandmate. This is one story Paul has not wanted to talk about fully, partly because it involves people he cares about and partly because it shows a side of him he isn't proud of. The moment with Maureen Starkey happened. It was private, and it caused problems that affected the already difficult chance of the Beatles getting back together. Paul has never wanted to discuss this time in interviews, but people close to know it bothers him. It was a moment where temptation, chance, and being near someone came together with bad results. It reminds us that even the best people can make a mistake when the situation is right. Joan Baez was the path he didn't take, the folk singer he met. Joan Baez was from a different world than Paul McCartney when they first met. She was a folk singer and a political activist in the busy 1960s. Paul was the Beatle, the pop star making music for screaming fans. But their worlds kept crossing at festivals, at events about social issues, when rock and roll was starting to mix with activism. They shared a moment of real connection in a place full of music, politics, and potential. What very few people know is that Joan and Paul had a short romantic and private connection in the late 1960s. This was when Paul was wondering what being a Beatle meant and looking for new directions. This happened before he met and married Linda, when Paul was with Jane Asher but meeting other people. The private moment between Paul and Joan was short but important. It was an encounter that showed a different life he could have had. Joan was married to activist David Harris during part of this time, which made whatever was between her and Paul even more complicated. Neither of them has ever said anything romantic or private happened between them. Joan has always been very private about her personal life, and Paul has simply never talked about Joan Baez as a romantic partner. But people in the music world who were there at that time have said there was real chemistry, real attraction, and probably a real private moment at some point between the two. Joan represented a world of political caring and social change that Paul was starting to learn about. She represented beauty, intelligence, and a serious wish to use music to help the world. For a short time, it's possible Paul thought about a different life. A life involved with Joan's activism instead of the commercial rock and roll world he chose. That moment passed, but the connection stayed important enough that Paul's close friends have mentioned it when talking about his love life. There was always a what if about Joan Baez, a feeling that in another life with different choices, that connection could have become something deeper and longer lasting. But now we want to hear from you. Which of these stories surprised you the most? Do you think Paul was brave to finally talk about these private parts of his life? Did knowing these things change how you see his music and his story? Tell us what you think in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe because more celebrity secrets are coming soon. Stories that will change how you see the people behind the greatest songs ever written.